So previously we looked at creating a server using the HTTP module in Node. Now we can create APIs with this approach, but it is not very maintainable as it will get messy very quickly because we will be creating all our routes in one file. This is where Express comes in. In this section, we will be looking at building our API with Express, which is a fast and lightweight framework for Node. But before that, we need to understand what are RESTful services. As mentioned earlier, in a main stack application, most of the logic stays on the front end, the client side, and the back end or the server side is the data source. Whenever our client side wants to get or save data, it does so by making an HTTP request. Now a RESTful service or a representational state transfer service is a way to build these HTTP services. REST services allow us to create, read, update, and delete data. These operations are generally termed as CRUD operations. So let's have a look at how a RESTful API looks like. So this is regular REST URL. It has a domain name. The http example.com is the domain name. /API is something optional, but developers like to add this so it is distinguishable. And then /users is our endpoint. Now this API endpoint will fetch all the users for us. Now we can make different types of HTTP requests to this endpoint, and different HTTP requests perform different operations. We can make requests like get, post, put, and delete. If we want to get the data of all the users, we make a get request to this endpoint, and the service will return to us all the users. Now if we want to get the data of one specific user, we pass the ID of that user in the endpoint, like so. And the service will return to us the data of that specific user. To create a user, we need to send an HTTP post request to this endpoint. Now, since we are creating a user, we also need to send some additional data, which we will send in the request body, like so. Now the service will take the data, create a user, and return to us the created user. To update the user, we send an HTTP put request to this endpoint. Now we want to update the data of one specific user, so we send the ID of that user in the endpoint. Also, we need to send any data that we want to update. In my case, I want to update the name, so I am sending the name in the request body. Then the service will take that data, request body, and it will update our users, and then it will return to us the updated user. And lastly, if we want to delete a user, we send an HTTP delete request to this endpoint. Now again, we are deleting one specific user, so we send the ID in the endpoint, and since this is a delete, we do not need to send any additional data, just ID is sufficient. So once that is deleted, we can return success or maybe the deleted user. So these are the methods that are available to us in creating the CRUD operations. Using these, we can create our API. So in the next section, we will be focusing on creating an API which will allow us to create, read, update, and delete data. We will not be interacting with the database. We will do that in the next section.